Welcome to Mystic Bedtime Stories, where ancient wisdom meets peaceful slumber. I'm your narrator, and tonight we embark on a gentle journey through time, to a land where honor was currency and courage was breath itself. This is your sanctuary of rest, where the great stories of our past become the quiet companions of your dreams. If this is your first visit to our channel, know that you've found a place where history whispers rather than shouts, where the grand tales of humanity are told with the soft cadence of evening rain. Subscribe and join our community of dreamers who find peace in the echoes of ages past. Close your eyes now and let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of the day leaving your shoulders, flowing away like water down a mountainside. Tonight, we travel not through space, but through time itself, to a valley nestled between ancient mountains, where the morning mist still carries the memory of bronze shields and whispered prayers. Imagine, if you will, the gentle warmth of Mediterranean sunshine filtering through olive groves. The air carries the distant sound of a shepherd's flute, drifting across hills that have witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Here, in this peaceful moment before dawn, we find ourselves approaching a land that would become legend. This is the Peloponnese, that great peninsula that hangs like a jewel from the mainland of Greece. The wind that touches your face has traveled across waters that reflected the sails of countless ships, carrying dreams and ambitions to distant shores. But tonight, we're not bound for distant lands. We're walking the quiet paths that lead to Sparta, the most extraordinary of ancient cities. Feel the soft earth beneath your feet as we walk these ancient roads. The stones remember footsteps from 3,000 years ago, when the world was younger and the boundaries between myth and reality were as thin as morning mist. You can almost hear them, those echoes of the past, calling to us across the centuries. In the distance, the Tegetos Mountains stand like silent guardians, their peaks touched with the first light of dawn. These mountains have watched over this valley since the world began, and they will continue their vigil long after our story is told. Between their protective embrace lies a land that would become synonymous with strength, discipline, and an unwavering code of honor. But this is not a tale of conquest or the clash of swords. This is a different kind of story, one that speaks to the deeper currents of human nature, to our eternal quest for meaning and purpose. Tonight, we explore not just the history of Sparta, but the soul of a people who chose to live by principles that demanded everything and promised nothing except the chance to live with honor. As we begin our journey, let yourself sink deeper into comfort. This is your time, your space, your moment of peace. The world outside these words cannot touch you here. You are safe, you are calm, and you are about to discover a world where every sunrise brought with it the opportunity to prove one's worth. Not through wealth or comfort, but through character itself. The story of Sparta begins not with the clash of armies, but with the gentle whisper of wind through olive trees and the soft light of dawn touching the walls of a city that dared to be different. A city that chose the difficult path, the narrow way, the road that led not to easy pleasures, but to something far more precious, the knowledge that one had lived fully, completely, and without compromise. So settle in, dear listener, and let us begin this gentle exploration of a time when the world was simpler, yet in many ways more demanding. Tonight, we discover Sparta not as conquerors, but as quiet observers, walking through history with the soft step of dreamers, finding in their ancient wisdom the keys to our own peaceful rest. The morning sun rises slowly over the Eurotas River, painting the water in shades of gold and amber. This gentle river has been the lifeblood of the Spartan valley for millennia, its waters carrying the sediment of mountains and the whispers of countless generations. As you stand on its banks in this quiet dawn, you can feel the profound peace that comes before the world awakens. Here, in this fertile valley of Laconia, surrounded by the protective embrace of ancient mountains, a unique civilization chose to make its home. The land itself seems to breathe with purpose. Every olive grove and rocky outcrop, shaped by the hands of those who understood that true strength comes not from abundance, but from discipline in the face of scarcity. Look around. You in this soft morning light. The landscape speaks of deliberate choices, of a people who saw beauty not in ornate decorations or grand monuments, but in the clean lines of necessity, the elegant simplicity of function. The Spartan homeland was never lush like other Greek territories. The soil was adequate, but not rich. The climate was pleasant, but not indulgent. It was a land that demanded effort, and in return, it offered something precious, the opportunity to grow strong. The Tagaros Mountains rise before us like sleeping giants, their peaks still touched with the silver of night clouds. These mountains were more than geographical features to the Spartans. They were teachers, silent instructors in the lessons that would define their civilization. Every morning, as the sun climbed above these peaks, it reminded the people below that some things in life are immovable, unchangeable, and must be accepted with grace and determination. In the gentle valleys between these hills, small communities began to form long before the name Sparta was spoken aloud. The earliest inhabitants were simple folk, farmers and herders who understood the rhythms of the seasons and the value of cooperation. They built their homes from local stone, homes that would last, homes that spoke of permanence and commitment to place. But something began to change in this peaceful valley, something that would transform these quiet farming communities into something the world had never seen before. It wasn't conquest from outside, nor was it the discovery of great wealth. Instead, it was an idea, a philosophy that began to take root like a seed in fertile ground. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary, that a community could choose to live by principles rather than convenience, that strength of character was more valuable than material wealth, and that true freedom came not from having many choices, but from choosing the right path and walking it with unwavering commitment. As generations passed, this philosophy began to shape not just individual lives, but the very structure of society itself. The Spartans looked at their land, looked at their challenges, and made a conscious decision. They would not try to make life easier. Instead, they would make themselves stronger. They would not seek to avoid difficulty. They would embrace it as a teacher. The river continues its gentle flow as we walk along its banks, carrying with it the memory of all those who have walked here before us. Children playing in its shallows, young people learning the ancient ways, elders sharing wisdom under the shade of olive trees that have stood for centuries. This is not a land of grand palaces or towering monuments. This is a land of enduring principles, where the greatest architecture was not built of stone, but of character. In this peaceful valley, surrounded by the eternal mountains and blessed by the constant river, the Spartans created something unique in human history, a society that voluntarily chose the difficult path, not because they had to, but because they believed it was right. They understood something that the comfort seekers of other cities did not, that ease without effort breeds weakness, while challenge embraced with purpose breeds strength. As the morning light grows stronger, warming the ancient stones and awakening the olive groves, we can almost see them in the mist, those early Spartans going about their daily tasks with quiet purpose. Not rushed, not anxious, but filled with the calm confidence that comes from knowing one's place in the world and accepting it fully. The god of war that gave this chapter its name was not the violent, chaotic deity of other cultures. Here, war was discipline, war was training, war was the daily battle against one's own weaknesses and limitations. Every sunrise was a call to arms, not against enemies, but against complacency, against the soft whisper of voices that said, "This is good enough," when excellence was possible. In this gentle valley, with its flowing river and protective mountains, the Spartans learned their first and most important lesson, that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. They found their purpose here, in this blessed land that demanded much and gave much in return. And from this foundation, they would build something that would echo through history. The sun is fully risen now, casting long shadows across the valley. Floor, let us linger here a moment longer in this peaceful morning and truly understand the profound connection between land and people that would define Sparta for generations to come. The olive trees that dot this landscape have stories to tell, their gnarled trunks bearing witness to countless seasons of growth and rest. These trees, some say, were planted by the first settlers who understood that true wealth comes not from what can be quickly gained, but from what can be carefully cultivated over time. Each olive was a promise to the future, a commitment that said, "We will be here, our children will be here, and their children after them." In the gentle morning breeze, you can hear the leaves whisper ancient secrets. They speak of patience, of the slow accumulation of wisdom, of the understanding that some things cannot be rushed. The Spartans learned this lesson well, watching their olive trees grow year by year, learning that strength comes not from haste, but from steady, persistent effort applied day after day, season after season. That the stones beneath our feet tell their own stories. Worn smooth by countless footsteps, they have supported the weight of farmers carrying their harvest, children running to play by the river, young men and women walking together in the soft light of evening. These stones remember when this valley was nothing more than scattered villages, each cluster of homes a small community bound together by necessity and mutual care. In those early days, before the name Sparta echoed beyond these hills, life moved at the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought the careful tending of crops, the gentle work of preparing the earth for new growth. Summer brought the harvest, a gathering of families to share in the fruits of their labor. Autumn brought preparation for the harder months ahead, the careful storage of grain and oil, the gathering of wood for winter fires. And winter brought the long, quiet evenings when stories were told, wisdom was shared, and the bonds of community were strengthened. But even in this peaceful setting, the people of this valley began to notice something that would shape their destiny. The world beyond their mountains was changing. Other cities were growing wealthy through trade, their inhabitants enjoying luxuries brought from distant lands. Some in the valley wondered if they too should pursue such wealth, such comfort, such ease. Yet something in the character of these mountain people resisted the easy path. Perhaps it was the daily sight of the Tagatos peaks, standing unmoved, against every storm, every season, every change of fortune. Perhaps it was the constant lesson of the olive trees, showing that the greatest rewards come to those who tend their roots rather than chase after fleeting pleasures. Or perhaps it was simply something deeper, a wisdom written in their very souls that recognize the difference between what is easy and what is right. As the morning light strengthens, we can see more clearly the villages scattered throughout the valley. Each one is built with purpose, every stone placed with care, every structure designed to last. There are no grand monuments here, no towering temples or ornate palaces. Instead, there is something more precious, the quiet dignity of people who have chosen to build something that will outlast them. The children of these villages play different games than children in other places. Their laughter rings across the valley as they chase each other between the olive trees, but their play is also preparation. They learn early to run swiftly, to climb surely, to help their neighbors without being asked. These are not lessons imposed from above, but values that emerge naturally from a community that understands itself as part of something larger. The women of these villages are unlike women in other Greek communities. They move with confidence, speak with authority, and carry themselves with the dignity of those who know their worth. Here, a woman's strength is celebrated, not hidden. Her wisdom is sought, not dismissed. Her voice matters, not just in the home, but in the community itself. This too is part of the emerging Spartan character, the understanding that true strength requires the full participation of all members of the community. And the men, whether they work the fields or tend the herds, carry themselves with a quiet pride that comes not from domination over others, but from mastery over themselves. They speak less than men in other places, but when they speak, their words carry weight. They have learned the value of silence, the power of listening, the strength that comes from thinking before acting. As we walk through this valley in the gentle morning light, we begin to understand that Sparta was not created by conquest or accident, but by choice. Every stone in every wall, every tree in every grove, every path between every village represents a decision made by people who valued permanence over convenience, strength over comfort, honor over ease. The river continues its eternal flow, carrying with it not just water, but the accumulated wisdom of all who have lived beside its banks. It speaks to us of persistence, of the power of steady effort, of the way that even the gentlest force, applied consistently over time, can shape the hardest stone. This is perhaps the deepest lesson of the Spartan Valley, that true power comes not from dramatic gestures or sudden explosions of force, but from the quiet, persistent application of principle, day after day, year after year, generation after generation. In this peaceful morning, as we prepare to meet the man whose vision would transform these philosophical principles into a way of life that would endure for centuries, we carry with us the understanding that Sparta was born not from ambition or accident, but from the simple, profound decision of a people to be worthy of their beautiful, demanding land. As the morning mist begins to lift from the Eurotas River, revealing the full beauty of the Spartan Valley, we encounter a figure walking slowly along the ancient paths. His footsteps are measured, deliberate, each one placed with the careful consideration of a man who understands that even the smallest actions can have profound consequences. This is Lycurgus, though history has wrapped his life in such legend that we can no longer say with certainty where the man ends and the myth begins. Perhaps this uncertainty is fitting, for Lycurgus represents something larger than any single individual. He embodies the collective wisdom of a people who recognized that their way of life needed guidance, structure, and purpose if it was to survive and flourish in a world that often rewarded the easy path over the right one. Legend tells us that Lycurgus was born into the royal family of Sparta, but unlike princes in other lands, he did not seek power for its own sake. Instead, he observed the communities around him with the patient eye of a gardener studying his soil, understanding that before anything could grow properly, the ground itself must be prepared with wisdom and care. In his youth, Lycurgus traveled widely, visiting other Greek cities, and even venturing to distant lands where different peoples had found different solutions to the eternal questions of how to live together in harmony and strength. In Egypt, he learned of stability and order. That lasted for millennia. In Crete, he observed communities that balanced individual excellence with collective good. In each place, he gathered wisdom like a careful scholar, not to copy what others had done, but to understand the deeper principles that made societies thrive or fail. But it was here, in this quiet valley with its olive groves and flowing river, that Lycurgus found his true calling. Walking these same paths we walk now, breathing this same mountain air, he began to envision something unprecedented, a society that would voluntarily embrace discipline, not as punishment, but as liberation from the chaos and weakness that plagued other communities. The task before him was immense. How do you convince a people to choose the difficult path when easier ones are available? How do you build a society on principles rather than preferences? How do you create laws that serve not just the present generation, but generations yet unborn? Lycurgus understood that true change cannot be imposed from above. It must grow from within, like a seed that finds fertile ground in hearts already prepared to receive it. So he began not with grand proclamations or dramatic gestures, but with quiet conversations, patient explanations, and the gentle persistence. Of water wearing away stone, he spoke to the elders under the shade of ancient olive trees, sharing his vision of a community where every citizen would be both strong enough to stand alone and wise enough to stand together. He walked with the young people along the riverbank, helping them understand that true freedom comes not from the absence of rules, but from choosing to live by rules that elevate rather than diminish the human spirit taught to the mothers and fathers. Of the valley, he explained that the greatest gift they could give their children was not comfort or ease, but the tools to build lives of meaning and purpose. He showed them that love is not protecting someone from all difficulty, but preparing them to meet difficulty with courage and wisdom taught slowly, carefully, like a master craftsman shaping bronze with patient hammer blows. Lycurgus began to propose the laws that would define Spartan society for centuries to come. But these were not arbitrary rules imposed by authority. They were principles discovered through observation of human nature and refined through careful consideration of their consequences. The first and most fundamental law was simplicity. In a world where other cities competed in displays of luxury and excess, Sparta would find its strength in the deliberate choice of enough over more. Citizens would own what they needed, but no more than they could use. Wealth would be measured, not in gold or silver, but in character and contribution to the common good. This was not poverty imposed by necessity, but simplicity chosen by wisdom. Every Spartan home would have what was needed for comfort and dignity, but nothing that existed merely for display or ostentation. A visitor to any Spartan house would find the same basic furnishings, the same simple meals, the same atmosphere of purpose and order. This equality was not enforced by surveillance or punishment, but maintained by the understanding that true worth comes from what one does, not what one owns. The second great law concerned education, but not education as other cities understood it. Spartan education would shape not just the mind, but the entire person, body, spirit, and character working together in harmony. Children would learn not just facts and skills, but wisdom and judgment. They would develop not just intellectual ability, but physical strength, emotional resilience, and moral courage. This education would begin early, but it would continue throughout life. Every citizen would be both teacher and student, sharing what they had learned while remaining open to new understanding. The community itself would be a school, where every interaction was an opportunity to practice the virtues that made life meaningful. The third law addressed governance, and here Lycurgus showed his deepest wisdom. Rather than concentrating power in the hands of a few, he distributed it among many, creating a system where no single person or group could dominate others. Kings would share authority with elected representatives, who would in turn be guided by a council of elders whose wisdom had been proven through years of service. But the true genius of this system was not in its structure, but in its underlying principle, that authority comes not from position or birthright, but from demonstrated commitment to the common good. Every leader, from the highest king to the humblest supervisor, would be accountable to the community they served, and their continuation in office would depend not on political maneuvering, but on the results of their service. As Lycurgus developed these laws, he tested each one not just in theory, but in practice. He gathered groups of citizens and asked them to live by proposed rules for periods of time, observing the results and making adjustments based on what actually worked, rather than what sounded good. This was legislation through experimentation. Lawmaking as a form of careful science. The process took years, even decades. There were setbacks and revisions, moments of doubt and periods of reconsideration. Some proposed laws were abandoned when they proved unworkable. Others were modified until they achieved their intended purpose. Throughout this long process, Lycurgus maintained the patience of a master gardener, understanding that the most important growth happens slowly, almost invisibly, over time. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Lycurgus's work was his understanding that laws alone, no matter how carefully crafted, cannot create a good society. Laws can provide structure and guidance, but the real work of civilization happens in the daily choices made by individual citizens who have learned to value the common good as much as their own welfare. So alongside his laws, Lycurgus developed what we might call a culture of excellence, a shared understanding of what it meant to live well. This culture was transmitted not through books or lectures, but through stories and examples, through the quiet modeling of virtue by those who had learned to embody it. In the gentle evening light that now bathes the valley, we can imagine Lycurgus, in his later years, walking these same paths, observing the fruits of his life's work. Children playing games that taught courage and cooperation. Young people training their bodies and minds with joyful discipline. Adults going about their daily work with the quiet satisfaction of those who know their lives have meaning and purpose. Laws he created were indeed laws of iron, not because they were harsh or inflexible, but because they were strong enough to support a way of life that would endure for centuries. Like the iron tools that helped build this valley's prosperity, these laws were instruments that enabled rather than constrained, tools that helped people become their best selves, rather than barriers that prevented growth. As night settles over the Spartan valley, and the first stars appear above the eternal mountains, we carry with us the understanding that true leadership is not about imposing one's will upon others, but about helping others discover the best within themselves. Lycurgus gave Sparta not just laws, but a vision of what human community could become when guided by wisdom, strengthened by discipline, and unified by shared commitment to something greater than individual desire. In the soft light of early dawn, when the world is hushed and expectant, we find ourselves in the heart of ancient Sparta, where the sound of children's laughter mingles with the gentle murmur of the Eurotas River. But this is not the carefree play of children in other lands. This is something deeper, more purposeful, yet filled with its own unique joy. Here, in this valley of discipline and honor, even childhood is touched by the understanding that life is preparation for something greater. The birth of a Spartan child was welcomed not just as a blessing to the family, but as a gift to the entire community. From the moment a baby drew its first breath in this mountain air, it was understood that this small life would one day contribute to the strength and wisdom of the whole society. Parents looked into their newborn's eyes and saw not just their own hopes and dreams, but the future of their people. In the quiet morning hours, as mothers held their infants close, they whispered, not lullabies of comfort and ease, but gentle songs that spoke of courage, honor, and the joy that comes from living a life of purpose. These were not harsh or demanding songs, but melodies filled with love and high expectation, the kind of love that sees potential and nurtures it with patient care. The early years of a Spartan child were spent in the warm embrace of family, but even this embrace was different from that found in other cities. Spartan parents understood that their role was not to shield their children from all difficulty, but to prepare them gradually for the challenges that would make them strong. Love was expressed not through indulgence, but through the careful cultivation of character. Young children played in the olive groves and along the riverbank, their games teaching them lessons they would carry throughout their lives. They learned to run swiftly over uneven ground, to climb safely among the rocks, to swim strongly in the flowing water. But more than physical skills, they learned the deeper lessons of cooperation, fairness, and the satisfaction that comes from doing one's best rather than simply winning. Their toys were simple but meaningful. Wooden swords taught them the weight and balance of weapons they might someday carry, but these games were more about discipline and form than violence. Spinning tops showed them the beauty of motion, guided by skill and patience. Simple puzzles developed their minds, while teaching them that some problems require quiet thought rather than quick action. As these children grew, they observed this adults around them with the keen attention of those who understood they were learning not just skills, but a way of life. They watched their fathers practice with sword and spear, not in anger or aggression, but with the focused concentration of craftsmen perfecting their art. They saw their mothers manage households with efficiency and grace, making decisions that affected not just their own families, but the community as a whole. The transition from childhood to formal education was marked not by trauma or sudden separation, but by ceremony and celebration. When a Spartan child reached the age of 7, they were invited to join the agoge, the comprehensive system of education that would shape them into citizens capable of contributing to their society's unique mission. The word agoge means leading or guidance, and this captures the true spirit of Spartan education. These children were not being driven or forced, but led along a path that had been carefully designed to bring out the best in human nature. The goal was not to break the spirit, but to strengthen it. Not to create unthinking obedience, but to develop the kind of inner discipline that makes true freedom possible. The young people entering the agoge lived together in groups, learning to be part of something larger than themselves, while still developing their individual strengths and talents. They slept on simple beds, ate simple food, and wore simple clothing, but this simplicity was not deprivation. It was liberation from the distractions that prevent people from discovering what they are truly capable of achieving. Their days began before dawn, not with harsh commands, but with the quiet organization of those who understand that excellence requires preparation. They exercised their bodies, training in running, jumping, wrestling, and the careful dance-like movements of combat. But these physical activities were always balanced with mental and spiritual development. They learned to read and write, but more importantly, they learned to think clearly and speak truthfully. They studied the great stories of their ancestors, not as dusty history, but as living examples of how to face life's challenges with courage and wisdom. They learned music and poetry, understanding that a warrior without culture is incomplete, that true strength must be balanced by beauty and grace. The discipline of the agoge was real, but it was not the cruel harshness that later storytellers would imagine. It was the firm, consistent guidance of teachers who understood that young people flourish when they know what is expected of them and are given the tools to meet those expectations. Rules were clear and fair, consequences were predictable, and educational and praise was given freely when it was earned. One of the most remarkable aspects of Spartan education was its emphasis on mutual support rather than individual competition. While excellence was encouraged and recognized, children learned that their success was meaningless if it came at the expense of their companions. They were taught to help the struggling, to share knowledge with those who needed it, and to understand that a community is only as strong as its weakest member. The famous stories of Spartan children being taught to endure hardship should be understood in this context. They were not brutalized or neglected, but gradually accustomed to discomfort so that they would not be overwhelmed by difficulty when it came. A child who learned to be comfortable sleeping on hard ground would not be defeated by a difficult campaign. A young person who learned to go without luxury would never be enslaved by material desires. But perhaps the most important lesson taught in the agoge was the understanding of purpose. These children learned early that life is not about personal pleasure or individual advancement, but about contributing to something that will outlast them. They were being prepared not just for their own success, but for their role in maintaining and improving the society that had nurtured them. The bond formed between children who went through the agoge together was deeper than ordinary friendship. They became something like brothers and sisters, united by shared experience and common purpose. This bond would last throughout their lives, creating a network of trust and mutual support that strengthened the entire community. As these young people progressed through their education, they gradually took on more responsibility, not just for their own development, but for helping to train the younger children who came after them. They learned that teaching is one of the highest forms of service, and that the best way to master something is to help others learn it. The education of Spartan girls was equally remarkable, though different in its specific focus. While boys were prepared primarily for military service and civic leadership, girls were educated to be the kind of women who could raise strong children and manage complex households. But this preparation was no less rigorous or comprehensive than that given to boys. Spartan girls exercised their bodies, developed their minds, and learned to speak with confidence and authority. They were taught that their role in society was not subordinate but complementary, that the strength of Sparta depended as much on strong mothers as on strong fathers. They grew up expecting to be partners in marriage, not possessions, and to be respected for their wisdom as much as their beauty. In the gentle evening light that now bathes the training grounds where these young people learned their lessons, we can almost see them still, not as grim, joyless automatons, but as young people filled with purpose and hope, learning to be worthy of the trust placed in them by their community. Their laughter echoes across the centuries, reminding us that discipline and joy are not opposites, but partners in the creation of meaningful life. The Agoge was not perfect, and the society it served was not without its flaws. But at its best, it represented something precious and rare, an educational system designed not to produce compliant workers or successful competitors, but to develop complete human beings capable of both individual excellence and communal loyalty. As the stars emerge above the Spartan Valley, illuminating the paths where these young people once walked and trained, we carry with us the understanding that education is not just about transferring knowledge, but about awakening the potential that lies dormant in every human heart. The Spartan way was one approach to this eternal challenge, an approach that recognized that strength without character is dangerous, that knowledge without wisdom is useless, and that individual excellence without community commitment is ultimately hollow. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, when the world holds its breath between night and day, we find ourselves in the women's quarters of a Spartan home. But these are not the secluded, restricted spaces found in other Greek cities. Here, the soft light of oil lamps illuminates faces that speak of confidence, wisdom, and the quiet authority that comes from being valued, not just for beauty, but for strength of character and depth of mind. The women of Sparta were unlike any others in the ancient world, and their story deserves to be told with the same reverence we give to the tales of warriors and kings. For in truth, these women were warriors themselves, fighting battles that were no less crucial for being fought in homes and hearts, rather than on distant battlefields dot from her earliest years. A Spartan girl understood that she was being prepared for greatness, not the kind of greatness that seeks attention or glory, but the profound greatness that comes from being entrusted with the future of civilization itself. She learned that her role was not to be ornamental or passive, but to be the foundation upon which everything else would be built. The education of Spartan women began with the same physical training given to boys, though adapted to their different purposes. They ran along the same riverbanks, exercised in the same gymnasiums, and developed the same strong, healthy bodies that would serve them throughout their lives. This was not vanity or idle pursuit, but practical preparation for the demanding roles they would play as wives, mothers, and community leaders. But their education went far beyond physical development. Spartan women learned to read and write at a time when such skills were rare among women in other cities. They studied poetry and music, not as mere entertainment, but as tools for shaping the minds and hearts of the next generation. They learned mathematics and logic, understanding that managing a household or a community required the same clear thinking needed for any complex endeavor. Perhaps most remarkably, they learned to speak with confidence and authority. In other Greek cities, women were expected to be silent in public, their voices heard only in the privacy of their homes. But Spartan women were encouraged to express their thoughts, to participate in discussions, and to offer their wisdom whenever it was needed. Their opinions were sought and valued, their insights considered essential to the proper functioning of society. The marriage customs of Sparta reflected this respect for women's strength and independence. Unlike other cities where marriages were primarily economic transactions arranged by fathers, Spartan marriages were partnerships between equals. A man did not acquire a wife as he might acquire property. He gained a partner who would share in the great work of building and maintaining their community. The wedding ceremony itself was simple but meaningful. The bride was not given away like a possession, but stepped forward as an equal partner in the covenant of marriage. She kept her own name, maintained her own property, and retained the right to speak her mind on all matters affecting their household and community. But it was in motherhood that Spartan women truly found their calling. They understood that their children belonged not just to them, but to the entire community, and that their role was to raise citizens who would be worthy of the trust placed in them. This was not a burden imposed upon them, but a sacred responsibility they embraced with pride and dedication. The famous saying attributed to Spartan mothers, "Come back with your shield or on it," has often been misunderstood as cruel or heartless. But when we hear it in the context of a mother's love, we understand its true meaning. These women were not sending their sons to die, but reminding them that some things are more important than mere survival. They were saying, in effect, live with honor, fight with courage, and know that your mother's love will follow you wherever you go. This same wisdom guided their approach to raising daughters. Spartan mothers taught their girls that strength is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear. They showed them that true beauty comes not from external adornment, but from the radiance of a life lived with purpose and integrity. They prepared them not just to be wives and mothers, but to be leaders in their own right. The daily life of Spartan women was filled with responsibilities that would have overwhelmed women in other cities who had been trained only for ornamental roles. They managed complex households, oversaw the education of children, participated in religious ceremonies, and contributed their wisdom to community decisions. They did all this while maintaining the physical fitness and mental acuity that made them respected partners to their husbands. In the Agra, the marketplace where the business of the city was conducted, Spartan women moved with the same confidence. As men, they engaged in trade, negotiated contracts, and participated in the economic life of the community. Their voices were heard in discussions of policy and planning, their insights valued in matters of both practical and spiritual importance. The religious life of Sparta was also shaped by the wisdom and dedication of its women. They served as priestesses, conducted ceremonies, and maintained the sacred traditions that connected the community to the gods and to their ancestors. In these roles, they were not subordinate to men, but equal partners in the spiritual life of their people. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Spartan women was their ability to maintain their strength and independence while still nurturing the bonds of family and community. They were not isolated individuals, pursuing their own goals at the expense of others, but integrated members of a society that recognized that true strength comes from the harmony of all its parts. The physical beauty of Spartan women was legendary throughout the ancient world, but it was a beauty that came from health, confidence, and the inner radiance of lives lived with purpose. They were not pale, secluded creatures hidden away from the sun, but strong, vibrant women who moved through the world with grace and dignity. Their clothing reflected this same philosophy. Spartan women wore simple, functional garments that allowed them to move freely and participate fully in life. They adorned themselves not with expensive jewelry or elaborate cosmetics, but with the natural beauty that comes from good health and the quiet confidence that comes from being valued for one's character rather than one's appearance. In the evening hours, when families gathered in their homes, Spartan women were not silent decorations, but active participants in the conversations that shaped their community's future. They shared their thoughts on matters of policy and planning, offered their wisdom on questions of ethics and values, and contributed their insights to the ongoing work of building a society worthy of their children's inheritance. The love between Spartan husbands and wives was built on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than on romantic fantasy or economic convenience. They were partners in the great work of civilization, each contributing their unique strengths to the common enterprise of building something that would endure beyond their own lives. As the gentle light of dawn now touches the hills around Sparta, illuminating the paths where these remarkable women once walked, we carry with us the understanding that true civilization requires the full participation of all its members. The women of Sparta showed the world that strength and gentleness, independence and community, individual excellence and collective commitment are not contradictions, but complementary aspects of human flourishing. In their quiet strength, their wisdom, and their dedication to something greater than themselves, the women of Sparta left us a legacy that continues to inspire. They remind us that the greatest battles are often fought not with swords and shields, but with love and wisdom, patience and courage, and the unwavering commitment to raise each new generation to be worthy of the trust placed in them. As the first light of dawn breaks over the ancient hills of Laconia, we find ourselves standing in the sacred training grounds of Sparta, where the morning mist still clings to the weathered stones. Here, in this hallowed space, generations of warriors have prepared for battles that would echo through eternity. The Spartan hoplite stands before us now, not as a figure of terror, but as a masterpiece of human dedication and discipline. His bronze armor catches the gentle morning light, each piece carefully crafted and lovingly maintained. This is not merely a soldier, but an artist whose canvas is the battlefield, whose brushstrokes are precise movements, honed through decades of practice. Watch as he adjusts his aspis, the great bronze shield that bears the lambda symbol of Lacedaemon. This shield is more than protection. It is a sacred trust passed down from father to son, polished smooth by countless hands and marked by the dents of honorable combat. The shield's inner surface tells stories in scratches and worn leather, each mark a testament to courage under fire. His spear, the dory, stands tall and proud beside him, its iron point gleaming like a star. 8 feet of ash wood, perfectly balanced, weighted just so that it becomes an extension of his very soul. In his hands, this simple weapon transforms into something almost magical, capable of precise thrusts that can penetrate armor or sweeping movements that can hold back an entire line of enemies. But the true art of the Spartan warrior lies not in individual prowess, though that is considerable. No, the real mastery reveals itself when these bronze-clad figures move together as one. The phalanx formation, that revolutionary tactical innovation that would dominate battlefields for centuries, flows like water and strikes like thunder. Picture, if you will, the moment when the horn sounds across the field. 36 warriors, 6 ranks deep, 6 men across, begin their advance. Their shields overlap like scales on some great bronze serpent, creating an impenetrable wall of metal. Determination. Each man's shield protects not just himself, but his brother to the right, creating bonds of trust that run deeper than blood. The rhythm of their advance is almost hypnotic, sandaled feet moving in perfect unison across the rocky ground. Bronze clatters softly against bronze as they walk, a metallic whisper that speaks of shared purpose and unwavering resolve. Their spear points create a forest of iron, angled forward at precisely calculated angles. each warrior knowing instinctively where his weapon must be to support the whole dot in this formation. The individual warrior finds something greater than himself. The fear that might grip a single man fighting alone dissolves into the collective courage of the group. The weakness that might plague one becomes the strength of many. This is the secret that Lycurgus built into the very foundation of Spartan society, the understanding that true power comes not from the mighty individual, but from perfect unity of purpose. As they near their opponents, the phalanx begins to sing, not with voices, but with the harmony of synchronized movement. Shields rise and fall in waves, spears thrust forward and withdraw in deadly rhythm. The enemy sees not 36 separate warriors, but a single, terrible entity of bronze and iron and implacable will. The moment of contact comes with surprising quietness. Despite what poets might tell you, battles rarely begin with thunderous crashes. Instead, there is the soft scrape of bronze on bronze, the muffled grunt of men pushing against overwhelming force, the whispered prayers to gods who watch from distant Olympus. And in this moment, each Spartan warrior remembers the lessons learned in childhood, the discipline carved into their very bones through years of the agoge. They remember that their shield belongs not to them alone, but to their comrades. They remember that retreat means not just personal dishonor, but the death of brothers who depend on their steadfastness. The phalanx pushes forward like a living thing, each warrior adding his strength to the collective effort. Feet find purchase. On blood-slick stones, shoulders press against the back of shields, and slowly, inexorably, the enemy line begins to bend and break. Yet even in victory, the Spartan warrior maintains his discipline. There is no wild charge, no breaking of formation to pursue fleeing enemies. The phalanx holds steady and unyielding until the battle is truly won, and the field is theirs by right of arms and courage. As evening falls over the ancient battlefield, we see these warriors tending to their weapons with the same care a craftsman shows his finest tools. They clean each spear point until it gleams, oil every joint of their armor, and check each link of their bronze cuirass. Tomorrow may bring another battle, another test of their training and resolve. But tonight, as they rest beneath the star-filled sky of ancient Greece, they carry with them the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled and honor maintained. They are the living embodiment of Spartan virtue, the bridge between the ideals of their lawgiver and the harsh realities of a world where only the disciplined survive. In their methodical preparation, in their unshakable loyalty to their comrades, in their willingness to face death rather than dishonor, they have achieved something approaching perfection in the art of war. Not the chaotic, brutal violence that lesser warriors practice, but war as a discipline, war as a sacred calling, war as the ultimate expression of human will and divine purpose working in perfect harmony. And so, as the moon rises over the hills of Laconia, casting silver light on bronze armor and iron spears, we leave these eternal warriors to their well-earned rest, knowing that their legacy will inspire soldiers and citizens for thousands of years to come. In the year when the world seemed to hold its breath, when the vast Persian Empire cast its shadow across the wine-dark sea toward the shores of Greece, there came a moment that would be remembered as long as humans tell stories of courage and sacrifice. The summer of 480 BCE brought with it not just the usual warmth and golden light of the Mediterranean, but something far more ominous, the approach of the largest army the world had ever seen. King Xerxes of Persia, heir to Cyrus and Darius, had spent 4 years preparing for this moment. His host numbered in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps even 1 million souls from every corner of his vast empire. Immortals from the Persian heartland marched alongside Scythian horsemen, Egyptian marines, and fierce warriors from India's distant mountains. The very earth trembled beneath their feet as they crossed the Hellespont on bridges of boats and rope, turning the narrow strait into a highway for conquest. But there, in a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, where hot springs bubble up from the earth and give the place its name, a small force of Greeks had gathered to make their stand. At their head stood Leonidas, king of Sparta, a man in his 60th year who had spent his entire life preparing for this single moment of destiny. The pass itself seems almost designed by the gods for such a confrontation. Rocky cliffs rise on one side, the waters of the Malian Gulf lap against the other, and between them lies a pathway so narrow that a handful of determined men might hold back an entire army. Ancient stories tell us that Heracles himself once walked this path, and now it would witness heroism worthy of the great hero's legacy. Leonidas had brought with him 300 Spartans, each one a full citizen, each one a veteran of countless battles, each one chosen not just for his skill with spear and shield, but for his absolute commitment to the Spartan ideal. These were not young men seeking glory, but mature warriors who understood the weight of the moment. They had kissed their wives goodbye, embraced their children, and walked away from their homes, knowing they would not return. With them came allies from across Greece, Thespians and Thebans, men from the small city-states that dotted the Greek landscape like jewels scattered across a dark cloth. Together, they numbered perhaps 7,000, a pitifully small force compared to the Persian multitude. Yet each man carried within his heart the flame of freedom that no earthly power could extinguish. As the Persian advance scouts first appeared on the heights above the pass, the Greeks made their preparations with the calm, methodical precision that had become their hallmark. Shields were polished until they gleamed like mirrors. Spear points were sharpened to razor keenness, and armor was adjusted with the care of men who knew their lives depended on every buckle and strap. Leonidas himself moved among his warriors with quiet dignity, speaking softly to each man, reminding them of their duty not just to Sparta, but to all of Greece, to their children and their children's children, to the very idea that free men might choose their own destiny. His words carried the weight of centuries, for he spoke not just as a king, but as the living embodiment of everything Lycurgus had dreamed when he gave the Spartans their laws. When Xerxes' herald arrived under a flag of truce, demanding that the Greeks lay down their arms, the response came not in words of defiance, but in the quiet dignity with which Leonidas received the message. "Come and take them," he said simply, gesturing toward the forest of spear points that gleamed in the morning sun. It was not a boast or a challenge, but a statement of fact delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had already made peace with his fate. The first Persian attack came at dawn on the second day, wave after wave of infantry streaming down the mountainside like a human avalanche. But the narrow pass forced them to approach in small groups, and there the Greek phalanx waited like an anvil upon which the Persian hammer would break itself. The sound of combat in that confined space was unlike anything heard in open battle. Bronze rang against bronze, spear points scraped across shield faces, and the cries of warriors echoed off the rocky walls until the very mountains seemed to join the battle. Yet through it all, the Greeks held their line with supernatural discipline, each man protecting his neighbor, each shield overlapping its brother, each spear thrust delivered with the precision of a master craftsman. Hour after hour, the Persians came on. Xerxes sent his finest troops, his immortals whose numbers were always maintained at exactly 10,000, whose reputation for invincibility had been earned in 100 conquered lands. But immortal or not, they bled and died like any other men when faced with Greek bronze and Greek determination. By the third day, something approaching desperation had crept into the Persian camp. This handful of Greeks, this tiny force that should have been swept away like leaves before a hurricane, continued to hold their ground with an obstinacy that seemed to defy the natural order of things. Xerxes himself climbed to a high throne, overlooking the battlefield, watching in growing amazement as attack after attack broke like waves against the Greek line. But even the greatest heroes are not immune to the workings of fate and treachery. A local Greek named Ephialtes, seeking reward from the Persian king, revealed the existence of a mountain path that would allow a force to circle behind the Greek position. As night fell on the third day, a Persian division led by Hydarnes began their treacherous climb through the darkness, following goat tracks and hunters' paths toward the rear of the Greek position. When dawn broke and the Greeks realized their position had been compromised, Leonidas made the hardest decision of his life. He dismissed the allied forces, sending them back to their cities to fight another day, but kept his 300 Spartans, along with the loyal Thespians who refused to abandon their posts. They would make their final stand here, in this narrow place where the rocks would remember their sacrifice long after their names had been carved in stone. The last battle began with the sun climbing toward its zenith, Persian arrows falling. Like dark rain from the sky, the Greeks formed a tight circle, shields locked together, spears pointing outward in all directions. They had become a bronze island in a sea of enemies, and like an island, they would endure the storm until the very end. One by one, the Spartans fell, not in panic or confusion, but with the same disciplined precision they had maintained throughout their lives. Each gap in their line was immediately filled, each fallen warrior's place taken by his comrade, until at last only a handful remained, still fighting with spears broken, shields split, armor dented and torn. Leonidas himself died as he had lived, with a spear in his hands and his face turned toward the enemy. The Persians, recognizing the fallen king, fought over his body with desperate fury, but the surviving Spartans formed one last wall around their leader, protecting him in death as they had served him in life. When the battle finally ended and silence fell over the pass, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. The Persians had won their victory, but at such a cost that even Xerxes wept when he saw the carnage. 7,000 of his finest warriors lay dead among the rocks, and the memory of Greek resistance would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. Yet in death, the 300 had achieved something greater than victory. Their sacrifice had bought precious time for the Greek cities to prepare their defenses, had shown the world that the Persian army could bleed and die like any other, had proven that free men fighting for their homes possessed a strength that no tyrant could comprehend or conquer. As twilight settled over Thermopylae and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, a strange peace descended upon the battlefield. The hot springs continued to bubble up from the earth as they had for countless centuries, washing the blood from the stones and carrying away the stains of war. But the echo of that last battle would resonate through history, inspiring poets and philosophers, soldiers and statesmen, ordinary men and women who faced their own moments of testing. The marker stone erected years later bore simple words that captured the essence of their sacrifice. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie. Not a boast of individual heroism, but a quiet testament to duty fulfilled and honor preserved. The final gift of warriors who had found immortality not in avoiding death, but in choosing how to meet it. And so, as the ancient moon rises over the pass at Thermopylae, casting silver light on stones that once ran red with heroic blood, we remember not just the 300 Spartans, but all those who stood with them in that narrow place where the fate of civilization hung in the balance. Their voices whisper still in the mountain wind, reminding us that some things are worth more than life itself, and that the greatest victories are sometimes won by those who know they cannot survive to see them. Beyond the bronze shields and marble statues, beyond the heroic tales that echo through eternity, there existed another Sparta, one rarely spoken of in the grand chronicles of war and conquest. This was the Sparta of quiet evenings and solitary moments, of hearts that bore burdens as heavy as any shield, of souls that paid the price for perfection in ways that no poet dared to sing got in the gentle hours after sunset, when the last light faded from the peaks of Mount Tegetos and the city settled into its evening rhythms. The true cost of Spartan discipline revealed itself in 1,000 small ways. Walk through the narrow streets of the ancient city during these twilight hours, and you would hear not the clash of bronze or the songs of victory, but something far more human and far more haunting, the sound of silence where laughter should have been. Consider the home of a Spartan warrior, returned from yet another campaign along the contested borders of the Peloponnese. The house itself speaks of the Spartan way, simple, functional, devoid of the ornate decorations that other Greeks prized so highly. No elaborate frescoes adorn these walls. No fine pottery displays the wealth of the household. Everything here serves a purpose, and beauty, if it exists at all, lies in the stark functionality of objects perfectly suited to their use. The warrior sits alone at his simple wooden table, his meal consisting of the notorious black broth that sustained Spartan soldiers in the field. The food is adequate, nothing more, designed to nourish the body without indulging the senses. Around him, the walls seem to press inward with the weight of expectations, each stone a reminder of the standards he must maintain, the image he must project, the weaknesses he must never reveal, his weathered hands, scarred from countless training, sessions and battles, rest motionless on the rough wood. These same hands that can grip a spear with deadly precision now tremble almost imperceptibly in the solitude of his own home. The tremor is not from fear or weakness, but from the constant tension of holding oneself to impossible standards, day after day, year after year, until the very muscles learn to carry the burden of all. Perpetual vigilance. His wife moves through the house with the same disciplined grace that marks all Spartan women, but beneath her composed exterior lies a loneliness that few outsiders could comprehend. She has been trained from childhood to be strong, to bear sons who will become warriors, to never show the fears that gnaw at her heart when her husband marches away to yet another battle. The emotional intimacy that other Greek couples might share has been sacrificed on the altar of Spartan virtue, replaced by a partnership built on duty rather than tenderness. She pauses sometimes in her evening tasks, her hands still on the simple clay vessels she tends, and looks toward the empty corner where her husband's shield rests when he is home. Even when he is present, there exists between them a careful distance, a space maintained not by lack of love, but by the understanding that too much attachment makes the inevitable separations unbearable. They have learned to love each other, the way Spartans love everything, with restraint, discipline, and an awareness that all things must eventually be surrendered to the greater good. Their children, when they are present, seem almost like visitors in their own home. The boys, once they reach the age of 7, belong more to the state than to their parents, returning from their barracks training as strangers who share blood but little else with the people who gave them life. When they do come home for brief visits, they sit stiffly at the family table, their small faces already learning to mask emotion, their young voices careful to show no weakness or need. The mother watches her sons with a mixture of pride and profound sorrow, seeing in their developing discipline the death of the carefree children they once were. She remembers when they would run to her for comfort when they fell, when they would laugh without calculation, when their eyes held the bright curiosity of childhood rather than the measured watchfulness of warriors in training. Now they embrace her with the same formal respect they show their instructors, and she must hide her heartbreak behind a smile of maternal approval. The girls, though they remain at home longer, are being prepared for their own roles in the great machine of Spartan society, learning to suppress their individual desires in service of the greater good. They watch their mothers with keen attention, absorbing not just the skills of household management, but the more subtle art of emotional suppression. They learn to speak in measured tones, to show enthusiasm only for appropriate subjects, to channel their natural exuberance into approved activities that will make them suitable wives for warriors dot in the quieter corners of the city. Away from the training grounds and the public spaces where citizens gather to discuss affairs of state, live those who bear perhaps the heaviest burden of all, the Spartans, who have somehow failed to meet the impossible standards of their society. The warrior whose nerve broke for just a moment in battle, whose shield was found behind him rather than beneath him. The mother whose son showed cowardice and brought shame upon the family name. The citizen whose physical imperfection prevented him from taking his place in the phalanx. These people exist in a gray twilight of social exclusion, neither exiled nor fully accepted, constant reminders of what happens when human nature asserts itself against the rigid demands of Spartan perfection. They move through the city like ghosts, visible but unacknowledged, their very presence a warning to others of the price of failure in a society that recognizes no middle ground between excellence and disgrace. Among them walks an old man whose limp tells the story of a wound received not in glorious battle, but in a moment of panic when he stumbled while retreating. His neighbors pass him without acknowledgement, their silence more crushing than any spoken condemnation. He tends a small garden behind his modest dwelling, finding in the quiet growth of vegetables the only peace available to one who has fallen from grace in the eyes of his community. There is a woman whose son fled from his first battle, bringing such shame upon the family that she can no longer hold her head high in public gatherings. She spends her days in solitary tasks, weaving cloth that no one will buy, tending to household duties that seem meaningless when performed in complete isolation. Her husband died honorably in the same battle where her son showed cowardice, and she often wonders which loss cuts deeper, the death of one who brought honor, or the survival of one who brought shame. Yet perhaps the deepest isolation of all belongs to those who have achieved the highest honors Sparta can bestow. The kings themselves, despite their royal status, live lives of profound loneliness, surrounded by advisors and courtiers, but trusted by none, responsible for decisions that will affect thousands, but able to confide in no one. Every word they speak is weighed for its political implications, every gesture analyzed for signs of weakness or favoritism. The current king often stands alone on his palace balcony in the pre-dawn hours. Looking out over the city he rules, but can never truly be part of. His crown feels heavier than any bronze helmet he has worn in battle, and the purple of his robes seems to separate him from his people more effectively than any physical barrier. He makes decisions that will send young men to their deaths, that will determine the fate of families, that will shape the future of the state. Yet he cannot discuss the weight of these choices with anyone who might truly understand. The ephors, those 5 magistrates who hold such power over Spartan life, carry their own burden of isolation. They must judge their fellow citizens with absolute impartiality, make decisions that may destroy families or end lives, all while maintaining the facade of moral certainty that their positions require. In private moments, when the weight of authority presses down upon them like a physical force, they too must wonder what they have sacrificed in their pursuit of the greater good. One of the ephors, a man who once laughed easily and loved music, now sits in his study each evening, surrounded by scrolls and tablets that tell the lives and failings of his fellow citizens. He has become an expert in human weakness, a connoisseur of failure and transgression, and the knowledge has left him unable to see his neighbors as anything more than potential cases to be judged. The spontaneous warmth he once felt for his community has been replaced by the cold objectivity his office demands. Even the most successful warriors, those whose names are spoken with reverence throughout the Greek world, find themselves trapped within the narrow confines of their own reputation. They cannot show doubt without appearing weak, cannot express fear without seeming cowardly, cannot even enjoy the simple pleasures that other men take for granted without being accused of softness or corruption. A veteran of 30 battles sits in his garden as evening falls, surrounded by the olive trees. His grandfather planted, but unable to take pleasure in their silver-green beauty. Every sunset reminds him of comrades who will never see another day end. Every bird song echoes with the cries of the wounded and dying. He has become a legend in his own lifetime, but legends, he has learned, are not permitted the luxury of human emotion. The Spartan ideal demands that its citizens become more than human, and in striving for that impossible goal, they often become something less. The emotional connections that bind other communities together, the spontaneous joy and natural affection that characterize human relationships elsewhere, have been systematically suppressed in favor of a colder, more disciplined form of social cohesion. In the pre-dawn hours, when sleep eludes even the most disciplined minds, many Spartans lie awake in their simple beds, staring up at ceilings that seem to echo with unspoken thoughts and suppressed emotions. They think of the friends lost in distant battles, of the children they barely know, of the dreams they abandoned in childhood, when the demands of citizenship first claimed them. Some turn to the gods for comfort, offering prayers to deities who seem as distant and implacable as the mountains that surround their city. But even in their religious observances, Spartans maintain the same stern discipline that governs every other aspect of their lives. Their prayers are formal, their rituals prescribed, their relationship with the divine as regulated as everything else in their carefully ordered world. The festivals and celebrations that punctuate the Spartan calendar provide brief respites from this emotional austerity, moments when the city allows itself to express something approaching joy. Yet even these occasions are carefully controlled, their exuberance channeled into acceptable forms of expression that reinforce rather than challenge the social order. The laughter that rings out during these celebrations has a hollow quality, as if the participants are performing happiness rather than feeling it. As dawn breaks over the ancient city and another day begins its measured progression through duty and discipline, the Spartans rise to face their obligations with the same stoic determination that has become their defining characteristic. They will train their bodies, sharpen their minds, fulfill their responsibilities to state and family. They will maintain the facade of perfection that the world expects from them. But in the quiet spaces between public duty and private pain, in the moments when no one is watching and the mask of Spartan virtue can slip just slightly, they remain fundamentally human. They feel the same longings for connection and understanding that move all hearts, the same need for tenderness and acceptance that no amount of discipline can entirely suppress. And perhaps, in the end, this is the most remarkable thing about the Spartans. Not that they achieved such extraordinary discipline and courage, but that they did so while remaining, beneath it all, as vulnerable and needful as any other human beings who have ever lived beneath the turning stars. Their greatest victory was not over their enemies, but over their own humanity, and their greatest tragedy was that this victory came at such a profound cost to their souls. As the evening light fades over ancient Greece, we find ourselves contemplating two cities that could not have been more different, yet were bound together by geography, rivalry, and an inevitable collision of ideals. Picture, if you will, too, sisters born under the same Mediterranean sky, yet raised in completely different worlds. Athens, that jewel of Attica, sprawled across rolling hills like a vast amphitheater facing the sea. Her streets buzzed with conversation, debate, and the constant hum of commerce. Merchants from distant lands wandered through her agora, their voices mixing with those of philosophers discussing the nature of truth beneath olive trees. The Athenians loved words as much as the Spartans loved silence. They crafted laws through endless discussion, built temples that reached toward the heavens in graceful marble columns, and celebrated the individual mind that could conceive new ideas. In the early morning hours, Athenian citizens would gather in gymnasiums where young men exercised their bodies, while older men exercised their minds in philosophical debate. The air itself seemed charged with possibility, with the electric energy of minds constantly questioning and exploring. The Athenian democratic process was a marvel to behold. In the great assembly on Nix Hill, thousands of citizens would debate matters of state. Every citizen, regardless of wealth or birth, could speak. It was messy, it was loud, but it was alive with human participation. The Athenians believed passionately in education's power to transform society. Young boys learned to read, write, calculate, and reason. They studied Homer not just as entertainment, but as guides to virtue. They learned geometry, astronomy, and most importantly, how to speak persuasively and think critically about the world around them. The physical city reflected this intellectual vibrancy. The Acropolis, crowned with magnificent temples, was more than a religious center. It was a statement of values made manifest in marble. The Parthenon declared that beauty and truth were worthy of humanity's highest effort. The Theater of Dionysus hosted dramatic competitions where playwrights explored themes of justice and human responsibility before audiences of thousands. In stark contrast, Sparta lay nestled in her mountain valley like a fortress of the soul. Her buildings were simple, functional, built for endurance rather than beauty. Where Athens celebrated human creativity, Sparta cultivated character discipline. Where Athenian children learned rhetoric and mathematics, Spartan children learned to endure cold, hunger, and pain without complaint. The Spartan way of life began before birth. When children were born, elders examined them. Those deemed unfit were exposed on Mount Taygetos slopes. For those judged worthy, the path ahead was predetermined. Until age 7, children remained with families, but even this period emphasized discipline. At 7, boys entered the agoge, that legendary system that would transform them into warriors. Boys lived in communal barracks, sleeping on beds of rushes they gathered themselves. They wore minimal clothing, a single cloak for all seasons, learning to endure heat and cold. Food was deliberately scarce, teaching resourcefulness and endurance. Yet this harsh system included music and dancing, for these instilled rhythm essential for military formations. Most importantly, the agoge taught boys to subordinate individual desires to group needs. Spartan women, though not undergoing the agoge, were educated rigorously. They exercised regularly, learned to read and write, and managed household affairs. Most importantly, they learned to value courage above life itself. The famous story of the Spartan mother telling her son to return with your shield, or on it, captures something essential about their values. The contrast in human development could hardly have been starker. The Athenian walked through life with curious eyes, questioning everything, believing knowledge could unlock any door. He valued eloquence, wit, and seeing multiple sides of questions. His ideal was the complete human being, physically fit, intellectually sharp, artistically sensitive, and politically engaged. The Spartan walked with steady steps, trusting tradition, believing discipline could overcome any obstacle. He had little patience for abstract speculation, preferring practical matters of duty and honor. His ideal was the perfect warrior, physically powerful, mentally disciplined, emotionally controlled, and absolutely reliable in crisis. These philosophies shaped every aspect of daily life. Athens looked outward, embracing trade, welcoming foreigners, absorbing new customs like a sponge. Absorbs water. Athenian merchants sailed to distant ports, bringing back goods, ideas, and innovations. The city was cosmopolitan, welcoming foreign residents who often prospered. Sparta looked inward, preserving ancient ways, suspicious of change as constant as surrounding mountains. Spartans rarely traveled unless duty required it. Foreigners were discouraged from visiting. They feared outside contact might corrupt their young men, introducing luxury and softness that would undermine harsh discipline. The economic systems reflected these differences. Athens thrived on trade and manufacturing. Athenian silver coins were accepted from Spain to the Black Sea. The city buzzed with commercial activity, workshops, and constant movement of goods and people. Sparta had deliberately rejected wealth pursuit. Spartan law forbade citizens from engaging in trade, occupations seen as beneath warriors' dignity. Their currency consisted of iron bars so heavy that accumulating wealth was virtually impossible. This was deliberate social engineering, choosing poverty as protection against corruption they observed wealth could bring. Yet both cities shared something profound. They were Greek, inheritors of the same myths, worshippers of the same gods, speakers of the same melodious language. Both honored heroes from legendary past, told the same stories of brave Achilles and clever Odysseus. Both sought favor of the 12 Olympian gods, though emphasizing different aspects. When Persian ships darkened the Aegean Sea like storm clouds, both cities understood their different ways of life were equally threatened. The Persian Empire represented everything both opposed, though for different reasons. To Athens, Persia meant tyranny. To Sparta, it represented luxury and corruption. The Persian Wars became the crucible testing both cities' strengths. The Athenian navy crushed the Persian fleet at Salamis, demonstrating democratic decision-making and tactical innovation. Athenian ingenuity used narrow straits as traps where Persian numbers became hindrances. Meanwhile, Spartan discipline held Thermopylae Pass, buying precious time with ultimate sacrifice, proving some things were worth more than life. For a brief moment, these philosophies complemented each other perfectly. Athens provided vision and adaptability. Sparta provided unwavering resolve. Together, they achieved what neither could accomplish alone, preserving Greek independence and protecting their unique ways of life. But peace proved harder to navigate than war. Without a common enemy, their differences began feeling like threats rather than strengths. The Athenians, growing wealthy from their maritime empire, saw Spartan conservatism as backwards. Why should Greece be held back by those refusing to embrace wider world possibilities? The Spartans, watching Athens grow powerful, saw corruption creeping in like morning mist. Athenian democracy, they believed, was mob rule dressed in fine words. How could a state make wise decisions when every citizen, regardless of experience, had equal voice? They observed Athenian wealth with deep suspicion, remembering their own laws forbidding gold and silver accumulation. Luxury made men soft. As decades passed, philosophical differences hardened into political tensions. Athens formed the Delian League, gradually becoming more empire than alliance. Tribute flowed into Athenian coffers, funding magnificent buildings and maintaining the largest navy the Mediterranean had ever seen. Athens spoke of spreading democracy and protecting freedom, but began looking uncomfortably similar to the Persian Empire she once fought. Sparta formed the Peloponnesian League, binding city-states valuing tradition and stability over innovation and expansion. They watched Athenian power grow with patient shepherds' vigilance, knowing eventually the storm would arrive. The inevitable conflict would last nearly 3 decades and reshape the Greek world forever. But for now, in this quiet evening hour, we can imagine a time when differences were still just philosophical disagreements, when Athenian merchants and Spartan warriors could meet at Olympic games and sacred festivals, each respecting the other's chosen path. In the growing twilight, we see both cities pursuing the same fundamental goal through radically different means. Athens sought excellence through exploration, creativity, and unlimited human mind potential. Sparta sought excellence through discipline, tradition, and unlimited human character strength. Neither path was wrong, neither perfect, and perhaps the greatest tragedy of coming war would be that the Greek world would ultimately lose the benefits of both. As the golden sun sets over the Peloponnese for what feels like the 1,000th time since our story began, we find ourselves standing where Sparta once stood triumphant. The great victory over Athens in the Peloponnesian War should have been the crowning moment of Spartan supremacy. Yet sometimes, dear listener, the greatest victories carry within them the seeds of decline. Picture, if you will, the year 404 BCE Spartan ships sail into the harbor of defeated Athens, their bronze-tipped spears glinting in the Mediterranean sun. The walls of Athens are torn down, stone by stone, to the sound of flutes playing victory songs. Sparta has achieved what seemed impossible. The mighty Athens, with all its wealth and intellectual brilliance, has fallen to the disciplined warriors of Lacedaemon. But victories, like the changing seasons, carry consequences we cannot always foresee. In the quiet moments after triumph, when the cheering fades and the bronze armor is hung away, a different kind of challenge begins to emerge. For generations, Sparta had defined itself against Athens. They were the land warriors opposing the sea power, the disciplined opposing the free-thinking, the few opposing the many. Now, with Athens humbled, Sparta found itself in an unfamiliar position, not as the underdog fighting for survival, but as the dominant power expected to lead all of Greece. The burden of empire, as the Spartans would learn, requires different skills than the art of war. Where once they had needed only to perfect their phalanx and maintain their borders, now they were expected to govern distant cities, manage complex alliances, and navigate the intricate world of international diplomacy. Imagine the aging Spartan. Veterans, men who had spent their entire lives in the narrow valley between the Tagatos Mountains, suddenly finding themselves responsible for Greek colonies scattered across the Mediterranean. These warriors, trained from childhood to obey without question and to value honor above comfort, now had to make decisions about trade routes, taxation, and the governing of peoples whose ways they barely understood. The very qualities that had made Sparta invincible in battle began to work against them in peace. Their rigid adherence to tradition, which had preserved their military excellence for centuries, now made them slow to adapt to changing circumstances. While other Greek states learned to embrace new ideas, new technologies, and new forms of governance, Sparta remained locked in the patterns that had served them so well for so long. Consider the Spartan citizen class, the Spartiates, who had always been few in number. Their population had never been large, perhaps 8,000, adult males at the height of their power. But warfare, even victorious warfare, takes its toll. Each battle, each campaign, claimed lives that could never be replaced. Unlike Athens, which could draw upon a vast population of citizens and allies, Sparta's human resources were finite and precious. The Helots, those conquered peoples who worked the land and supported the Spartan war machine, began to sense the weakness in their masters. Revolts that had once been easily crushed now required more effort, more attention, more of the dwindling Spartan manpower to suppress. The very foundation upon which Spartan society rested, the subjugation of a much larger population, became increasingly unstable. As we listen to the gentle evening breeze rustling through the olive groves of ancient Laconia, we can almost hear the whispered conversations in Spartan homes. Mothers who had once proudly sent their sons to war now counted the empty spaces at their tables. Fathers who had known only victory began to speak in hushed tones of defeats in distant lands. The Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC marked the beginning of the end. For the first time in memory, a Spartan army was decisively defeated on land by the Thebans under Epaminondas. The myth of Spartan invincibility, carefully cultivated for centuries, was shattered in a single afternoon. The psychological impact was perhaps even greater than the military defeat. News of Leuctra spread through Greece like wildfire. Cities that had trembled at the mere mention of Spartan hoplites now dared to raise their heads. The Helots, sensing opportunity, rose in greater numbers. The careful balance of fear and respect that had held the Spartan Empire together began to crumble. But perhaps the greatest enemy of Sparta was not any foreign army or internal rebellion. It was time itself and the inevitable march of change. The world was becoming more connected, more complex, more dependent on trade and diplomacy rather than simple military might. The Spartans, for all their virtues, had never learned to bend with the wind. They had created a perfect system for a particular moment in history, a time when the greatest threat came from external enemies who could be met with bronze spears and disciplined courage. But history, dear listener, does not stand still for anyone, not even for warriors as magnificent as the Spartans. In the decades following Leuctra, we see a Sparta that struggles to recognize itself. The old training methods continue, but with less purpose. The ancient customs are maintained, but with less conviction. It is like watching a great tree, once mighty and green, slowly losing its leaves one by one as winter approaches. The other Greek states, meanwhile, continued to evolve. They formed new alliances, developed new military techniques, embraced new philosophies. Athens, even in defeat, remained a center of learning and culture. Thebes enjoyed its brief moment of supremacy. New powers like Macedon began to rise in the north. And where was Sparta in this changing world? Still in its mountain valley, still drilling its young men in the use of spear and shield, still believing that the old ways, the pure ways, were the only ways worth following. They had become, without realizing it, prisoners of their own perfection. The final bitter irony came with the rise of Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander. These northern Greeks, influenced by Spartan military discipline, but free from Spartan social constraints, would conquer not just Greece, but the known world. They took the lesson of Spartan courage and combined it with Athenian adaptability, creating something new and terrible and magnificent. When Alexander's armies marched past Sparta on their way to conquer Persia, the great warrior state could only watch from its mountains. The age of the city-state was ending, and the age of vast empires was beginning. Sparta, which had once seemed eternal, was being left behind by the very history it had helped shape. As our story of this chapter draws to a close, we see the sun setting not just on another day, but on an entire way of life. The Sparta that had faced down the Persian Empire, that had defeated mighty Athens, that had made the world tremble at the sight of its red cloaks and bronze shields, was slowly fading into legend. Yet in this fading, there is a kind of beauty. For even as political power slipped away, even as enemies pressed closer, even as the old certainties crumbled, something essential remained. The spirit that had created Sparta, the belief in duty, in honor, in the willingness to sacrifice for something greater than oneself, could not be conquered by any army or destroyed by any defeat. The stars wheel overhead as they have for countless generations, and in their silent dance we see the eternal rhythm of rise and decline, of glory and loss that touches all human endeavors. Sparta's moment of earthly dominion was ending, but its example would echo through the ages, inspiring others to their own moments of greatness. Sleep comes now to the ancient land of Laconia, as it comes to all things in their season. And in that sleep, perhaps, the dreams of warriors still march in perfect formation through the mists of time. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our long journey together through the mists of ancient time, to a place where morning dew still gathers on the wild grasses of what was once the greatest warrior state the world has ever known. If you were to visit the valley of Sparta today, you would find no towering monuments, no gleaming marble temples reaching toward the heavens. The Spartans, true to their nature even in their architecture, built for function rather than glory. They believed that a city's true walls were not made of stone, but of the brave hearts of its defenders. And so, when those hearts finally stilled, the physical traces of their civilization quietly returned to the earth from which they came. The morning sun rises now over rolling hills dotted with olive trees, their silver-green leaves whispering secrets to the gentle Mediterranean breeze. Wild flowers bloom where once the bronze-clad phalanx practiced their formations. Shepherds' bells tinkle in the distance where once the war drums of the Agoge called young boys to their training. Time, the great transformer, has worked its ancient magic, turning battlefields into pastures and parade grounds into peaceful meadows. Yet as we stand in this quiet place, something remarkable happens. Close your eyes for a moment and listen, not with your ears, but with that deeper sense that connects us to all who have walked this earth before us. Can you hear it? The faint echo of bronze on bronze, the measured cadence of disciplined feet moving as one, the whispered prayers to gods whose names are now remembered only in books and dreams. The physical Sparta may have crumbled, but the spirit of Sparta lives on in ways both subtle and profound. Every parent who teaches their child to stand up for what is right, every person who chooses duty over comfort, every soul who faces adversity with quiet courage carries within them a spark of what made those ancient warriors so remarkable. Think of the countless stories told around countless fires over the past 2.5 millennia. Tales of 300 heroes who chose honor over life, of mothers who raised their sons to value courage above all else, of a society that dared to believe that discipline and dedication could triumph over any odds. These stories have traveled far from their mountain valley birthplace, carried in the hearts of soldiers and scholars, poets and kings, ordinary people seeking extraordinary inspiration. The Roman legions, marching across their vast empire, studied Spartan tactics and tried to emulate Spartan discipline. Medieval knights, bound by codes of chivalry, looked back to Spartan ideals of honor and sacrifice. Renaissance thinkers, reimagining the nature of citizenship and duty, found wisdom in Lycurgus's ancient laws. Even in our modern world, when we speak of someone showing Spartan qualities, we invoke virtues that transcend time and culture. But perhaps the most beautiful legacy of Sparta lies not in the grand gestures of history, but in the quiet moments of personal choice that define each of our lives. The decision to keep going when we want to give up. The choice to help others even when no one is watching. The simple act of maintaining our principles when it would be easier to compromise them. In these moments, we are all descendants of those ancient warriors. As the evening shadows grow longer across the Peloponnese, we can imagine the ghostly figures of Spartan elders gathering one last time in the place where their agora once stood. They speak not of battles won or lost, but of something more enduring. They speak of the invisible bonds that tie one generation to the next, the unbroken chain of courage and commitment that connects past to present, to future. Listen now to what they might tell us across the centuries. That true strength is not in the bronze of our weapons, but in the steel of our resolve. That real victory is not in conquering others, but in conquering the weakness within ourselves. That the greatest legacy we can leave is not monuments to our glory, but examples of our character. The stars that shine above ancient Sparta tonight are the same stars that watched over Leonidas and his 300 at Thermopylae, the same celestial lights that guided Spartan mothers as they raised their children to value honor above life itself. These stars will continue to shine long after our own brief moment on this earth has passed, and in their eternal dance, they remind us that some things transcend the boundaries of time and mortality. In the deep quiet of this ancient land, where the wind still carries the scent of wild thyme and rosemary, where the mountains still stand guard over the valley as they have for countless ages, we find a peace that transcends understanding. It is the peace of completion, of stories told and lessons learned, of courage acknowledged and sacrifice honored. The shepherds who now tend their flocks wear Spartan warriors once trained do not know the names of the heroes who walked this ground before them. But in their quiet dedication to their daily duties, in their willingness to brave mountain storms to protect their animals, in their simple, uncomplicated commitment to their responsibilities, they carry forward something essential of the Spartan spirit. And so our tale ends not with the clash of weapons or the cry of victory, but with the gentle settling of dew on morning grass, with the soft sound of sheep bells in the distance, with the whispered promise that courage, once kindled, never truly dies, but passes like an eternal flame from one heart to another. Sleep now comes to the land of ancient warriors, as it comes to all of us at the end of our journeys. But in that sleep, dreams continue to march. Dreams of honor and duty, of sacrifice and service, of ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things, not for glory or reward, but simply because it is right. That the sun sets on our story as it sets each day on the hills of Laconia, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that would have been familiar to Spartan eyes 25 centuries ago. In that continuity, in that endless cycle of day and night, season and year, we find comfort and connection to something larger than ourselves. Rest now, dear listener, knowing that the courage of the ancients lives on in each of us, waiting to be called upon when we need it most. Close your eyes and let the peace of ages settle over you, carried on the same winds that once stirred the crimson cloaks of Sparta's immortal 300 in the quiet darkness. Their watchful spirits stand, guard over our dreams, and all is well.